Well, it is Jay Nice on the mic here, back with a new video series. So I have decided that I will be doing a video series called Resistance in the Age of Surveillance. And I really am going to be talking about the lessons that I wrote about in my book, Rise and Resist, which comes out February 24th. So this book was written to highlight the legacy of Black resistance and look at what Black people throughout history can teach us about resistance in this moment. And so I include 32 different Black people throughout history. Some have passed on to the spirit realm, some are still living, and I analyze their legacy of resistance, the ways that they resisted, and how we can learn from them and their legacy. So I wanted to do this series because I feel like this book could not be coming out at a better time, because we need resources like this, right? And today, the day that I'm recording this past weekend, we saw that ICE murdered another person in Minneapolis. And that situation hit close to home for me because I know some of you may not know this, but I'm a former Minnesota resident. My family and I lived in Minnesota, and I go to Minneapolis every single year. And I was just in Minneapolis in October of 2025. And so this situation is just a microcosm of what is happening across the US and across the world. And I want to remind us that we've been here before, right? There have been some differences. We weren't in the age of technology, but the opposition has always been there. And so now that things have changed a little bit and we do have these tools that we can use to resist, how do we resist in the age where these tools are actually surveilling us, where the microphone on several of my apps is probably listening to me right now and surveilling me and monitoring me and tracking me? What does resistance look like, or what can resistance look like in this era? So I'm looking down because I have a set of notes to make sure that I talk about everything in this video. So I talked about why I'm doing this series. And I'm going to drop some articles that I've written about surveillance culture in the show notes, but this is something that I've become really increasingly interested in talking about because I see the links between justice and equity and surveillance culture and technology, and how these technology companies are harvesting and mining our data and using that data to cause further harm, especially to communities that are already marginalized. And so we see what's happening with Palantir. I saw a really great deep dive from the creator Lovely T. If you don't follow her, she's an amazing Minnesota-based creator. She does like current events and celebrity gossip and tea, but she is very informed, and I love her takes. I love her perspective, and she did a deep dive on Palantir, and it was really, really interesting, a deep dive that she did, and it just confirmed a lot of what I already felt and what I already thought about that company. And Palantir, for those who don't know, is like a company created by Peter Thiel that essentially harvests data. I think the best way to describe them is like they're data harvesters. So they've worked with ICE, they work with police departments, they've worked with organizations and institutions to essentially just provide data, right? And so I felt like it was really important to do this series because I'm scrolling on social media and so many people are thinking about and asking this question of what it is that we can do to resist and what resistance can look like. And I was like, I wrote a whole blueprint on resistance using the lessons and legacies of Black people globally who have resisted some of the most horrific circumstances. And I do feel like this book is so important for anybody that is trying to resist the current regime. So Who am I? You might be wondering, this might be the first video of mine that you're watching, so you're like, who's this person? So I am an organizational psychologist. I have a PhD in organizational psychology, so I studied the psychology of the workplace. Okay, so I'm back. The light is, the sun is setting, so I'm trying to catch the light. I had a meeting, so I had to do that meeting. So I also want to say before we get started that it's not missed on me the irony of creating a video about resistance on a platform like YouTube that is owned by Google, and Google has so much of our information, and it's not missed on me and it's not lost on me. I've actually, out of all of the social media platforms, which are all compromised, I actually prefer YouTube and LinkedIn. But I also understand that these platforms are all compromised, right? And I'm picking my poison, and I'm picking the platform that I think I can do the most good on. And so I do want to acknowledge the irony of this whole video series. But so I wrote this book, Rise and Resist, because I wanted to provide us with a blueprint for resistance. And I wanted us to look at history and look at what those who came before us, who had to endure some of the most dire circumstances, did to make it through. And so I want to talk about specifically one of the strategies that I named in this book, which is how we can all use documentation and documenting as a way to resist. So documenting can be in the form of recording videos, writing records, keeping receipts, anything that allows us to take a snapshot of an event or events that have happened, and that kind of memorializes that, right? So in the book, I talked about the brave then 17-year-old girl, Darnella Frazier, who was the one who recorded the almost 9-minute interaction between George Floyd and the police officer who murdered him, and how that is a form of documenting as resistance. Imagine what would have happened. We all know what would have happened if that video didn't exist. And if Darnella hadn't recorded that video, we would not have seen the reactions and the uprising that we saw in 2020. And that is a powerful form of documentation as resistance. So Ida B. Wells is a great example of documenting as resistance, because she created something called the Red Record, where she outlined in a book all of the lynchings of African Americans that took place in the country in the 1800s. And this was her way to memorialize and to keep an archive of the harm that was being caused to Black Americans in the US at that time, right? So that is an amazing example of documenting resistance. And another example that I talked about in the book was Mamie Mobley Till, who is the mother of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago who was visiting family in Mississippi. Carolyn Bryant lied on him and said that he whistled at her. Carolyn Bryant was a white woman. Emmett Till was a young Black boy. And he was brutally beaten and killed by Carolyn Bryant's associates and family members. And Emmett Till was so badly mutilated that it was hard for his uncle to identify him and identify his body. And what Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till, did was that she allowed an open casket at Emmett Till's funeral so that the entire world could see the brutality of the folks that murdered him. And Jet Magazine actually took a photo of Emmett Till in the casket. And a lot of historians actually say that this was the moment that the civil rights movement was sparked, or this was one of the catalysts behind the civil rights movement. And so these three are really great examples of how we can use documentation and how we can document things as a form of resistance. We see what has been happening in Minnesota and in different parts of Minnesota, specifically in Minneapolis. And we see that ICE is taking people and snatching them up. And the only way that we are able to see the truth of what has been happening is through people documenting, people taking their phones out, excuse me, and taking video of what is happening in real time. I'm sure many of you saw that live stream of the DoorDash driver who ran into a couple's home because she was being chased by ICE. And that live stream was wild to see. And I started crying in the live stream, as I'm sure so many of us did, because watching the fear and the terror that woman had is just like, this is what we've become as a country. So we cannot forget the power that we have in our hands and in our pockets, and how one of the ways that we must continue to resist in this moment is using our phones to document the harm, the horror, the tragedies, and the horrificness that is happening right before our eyes. We should also use social media to resist. Again, all the social media platforms, as we all know, are compromised, but we can still, that doesn't mean we can't use social media to share what's going on, to do live streams, right? I've seen, and I love that people who are getting pulled over by the police sometimes live stream themselves and show their audience, so that if anything does happen, which it happens more often than it ever should happen, if anything does happen, there is a record of it, and there can't be, people can't try to lie on them. Well, I mean, even when there is video, we see what happens, right? But social media can be a tool of resistance, and we can also use social media to share with our audiences the harm that is happening. We don't have to think that because we don't have a large social media account that we can't create change. I think about the Black woman, Michelle, who was instrumental in the video of those two Black men at that Philadelphia Starbucks being arrested, right? Michelle, and there was another white woman who posted it on her Twitter, but I believe Michelle was the one who recorded the video, and then the white woman posted it, and it ended up getting millions and millions and millions of views. And I don't believe that the white woman who posted it had a large social media account. So we can't think that just because we don't have hundreds of thousands of followers or even thousands of followers on social media, that posting about the harm that we see and that we witness cannot create change, right? We have to recognize that we all have power in the social media tools, that even though there's mass suppression, even though there is shadow banning, even though there is a lot of censorship that takes place, these tools, social media, can still be used as a tool to broadcast harm at a large and at a mass scale that is taking place in this country. Social media can also be used as a tool to mobilize people, right? And we have to use social media for what it is and then bring people offline, right? And so many people have been talking about right now how you can use social media to find your people, but then take them offline. Because again, if social media were to disappear today, or there were blackouts, and we see that this happens often where social media might not work, or I just saw Deontay Kyle was saying that he was trying to post on TikTok and it was glitching or something. You have to be able to connect with your audience outside of social media. I recommend having people's phone numbers. I also recommend creating an email list and bringing people to your email list and to your email platform so that you can connect with people directly. Substack and all of these other social media platforms, I don't know if Substack is social media, but all of these platforms are great. But in the event that there's some sort of glitch and they no longer work, we have to be able to connect with our people. And so using social media not only as a tool to broadcast what is happening and to document what is happening, but to also find our people, find our community, and connect with them offline is important, and is one of the ways that we can use documentation to resist. We also have to understand that in our efforts to document on social media, that certain words are shadow banned, certain content is shadow banned, and so we have to understand the system and do what we can to infiltrate the system. I remember when I was promoting my third book, Decentering Whiteness in the Workplace, I was intentional about not writing out whiteness on social media, because that's a term that may be suppressed. So when I talked about it on LinkedIn in particular, I would use the white circle. And I remember there were people who were like, why do you use the white circle, right? Who didn't understand that suppression and censorship takes place a lot on these platforms. So I would definitely say that being aware of how to infiltrate the system and use the system to our advantage is imperative. Also recognizing that all of our phones are being tracked. Even when you turn off the phone, there's still a way to track it. If you have an iPhone, we know that Find Your iPhone still works when your phone is off, or can still work, right? So if you are going to participate in a protest, or you don't want to be tracked, you need to leave your phone behind. Our cars are tracking us, right? And so if there's CCTV in the town or city where you live, that's tracking you. But recognizing that, if you don't want to be tracked, if you are going somewhere or engaging in a protest, you want to make sure that you don't have your phone on you, right? So it's important for us to document the harm, not only in the form of videos, but also like using our art and transmuting our anger into art, right? For me, I'm a writer, and so I love to write about the conditions of what's going on. It was Nina Simone who said, my job as an artist is to reflect the times. And I think that it's our job to reflect what is happening in this country and in this world, whether it's through our voice and our activism, whether it's through going out and drawing and creating artwork around what is happening, right? We have to be able to create archives and document the horror that is taking place, because what is going to happen is that these people are going to try to convince us that these things never happened and that everybody was on board. Like, I had a conversation with someone and she's like, well, as a black person, I'm sitting this fight out, right? Because we see how those people voted, and they didn't vote. They voted against their own interests. And while I understand that sentiment, I feel like we have to be community minded. I know that there are some people that voted against their interests, but I don't think an entire community or entire communities should be penalized based on how some people voted. I think that, I'm not saying go out in the streets, everybody has to be out in the streets and protest, but I do think that we all have a role to play, and we shouldn't think that if terror comes to your neighbor today, that same terror is not going to come to us in the morning, right? And so I think it's important for us to understand that all of the oppression and all of the harm that we're witnessing is interconnected, and that it's going to impact all of us in some way or another. And yes, for Black Americans, for Indigenous people, this harm has always been taking place. But I think not doing anything is not going to help the situation, right? There is a beautiful quote by Toni Morrison, and she said, in times of, and I'm paraphrasing, she said something like, in times of mass chaos, an artist's job is to create art. A writer's job is to write. And so I think that we cannot be deterred by what is happening in the chaos, right? I'm reading this book called Cruelty is the Point. And I do feel like cruelty is the point. And the point is to distract us from all of these things that we should also be focusing on. And is to discombobulate us and have us have our attention and our energy in a million different directions. But it's important for us to transmute our anger, like Audre Lorde said, into collective action. So one thing I talk about in the book is documenting as a form of resistance in the workplace and what that can look like, right? If you're experiencing harm in your workplace, it's always important to keep receipts. It's important to always keep receipts, right? Keep emails, keep records, document the things that are happening. File, go to HR and file different documents and file things so that there is a paper trail of and a record of what it is that you're experiencing. Find online communities where you can talk to people. Go on to Reddit, go on to Glassdoor, go on to these places where you can talk with people and share your experiences with them. And all of these to me are different forms of documentation as resistance, right? We have to be taking a snapshot of this moment because, again, if we let the victor tell it, slavery did not exist, slavery was a good thing for Black people, all of these lies that will be spewed and that will be used to rewrite history. And so we have to make sure that there is an accurate record and also that we use the tools that are available to us to resist, to record, to keep records, to create art, and to write, and to document what is happening right now in this moment is our own form of resistance. Because again, when all of this is over, at some point, when this terror is over, they're going to try to convince us that none of this ever happened, and we cannot let that happen. That concludes this video on documentation as resistance. I hope you found this video to be informative and to be useful. If you want to learn more about the long legacy of Black resistance, I encourage you to pre-order my new book, Rise and Resist, which comes out in February of 2026. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.